Oppenheimer is the best film we've gotten all year, so let's talk about this masterpiece of a film. As always, if you don't want spoilers, even though this is a true story, so you kind of already know what's going to happen. But anyways, if you don't want spoilers for some reason, head over to my shorts or my TikTok and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Oppenheimer. This movie is Christopher Nolan at his very best, and in my opinion is probably his best film. The way this guy tells stories is just so interesting to me, and the way he delivers at the very end of each movie when he pulls everything together is just brilliant. I mean, there's a reason Christopher Nolan is my favorite director, and this movie just kind of solidified that for me. So let's get into what this movie is about. So in this movie, we follow J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is approached to join the Manhattan Project, and now he joins a team of other physicists to help create the first atom bomb. So let's hop right into the good, because there is a lot of it in this movie. And starting things off here, I have the story. And even though this movie is a biopic and it's a non-fiction movie, this story was told beautifully. So this movie was more about just the atom bomb. It was truly a character study on Oppenheimer and what he went through during this time of creating the first atom bomb. This movie is told from his perspective. We see everything through his eyes, and we quite literally get to see what went through his mind during this time. As I said before, Christopher Nolan told this story beautifully. The way he jumped around from scene to scene, from moment to moment, and then tied it all together right there in the third act to make everything make sense was nothing short of amazing. And speaking of that third act, it was honestly probably the best part of the film for me, in my opinion, but I'll touch on that just a little bit later. And yes, this movie was 3 hours long, but this story was just so engaging in the way it was cut together and the way it was told that you honestly don't even feel it, in my opinion. And next up for the good is, of course, Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer. And at the very least, I think Cillian Murphy should get an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, because he did amazing in this movie. He really dove into this role and just killed it in every scene that he was in. But what really stood out to me about his performance were the scenes where he didn't have as much dialogue and had to show emotion. For instance, there was one scene, and you may know what I'm talking about. It was after they had used the atom bomb and everyone was kind of celebrating Oppenheimer. They were in this gymnasium and everyone was kind of chanting his name. And in this scene, we really saw Oppenheimer struggle with killing innocent people. And I don't even know how to really explain this, but the emotion and facial expressions that we got there from Cillian Murphy just made this one of the best scenes in the movie for me. And if you add that on with Nolan's directing and the sound design in this scene, it is just, oh my gosh, just you felt every second of that scene. And that's just one example, but there are plenty other scenes in this movie where we just get a close-up on Cillian Murphy's face and we know every single emotion he is feeling in that moment with absolutely no dialogue. So a big round of applause for Cillian Murphy. I really hope he gets nominated for an Oscar, or heck, even wins it, because this was his movie and he absolutely killed it all the way through. And next up for the good is Robert Downey Jr. Now, Robert Downey Jr. in this movie was phenomenal, and at the end of the day, he may end up with an Oscar as well. Before this movie, he said that this is the best movie that he has ever done, and I was a little bit skeptical about that because, you know, you do have Infinity War and Endgame and all the Marvel movies he's done, but after seeing this movie, I completely understand. This is easily, hands down by a mile, the best movie that he has ever done. I loved seeing him essentially play the villain in this movie, and when he was on screen, he stole the show, in my opinion. I mean, when Robert Downey Jr. appeared on that screen, your eyes were locked on him and what he was doing, because his performance was just that good. And a lot of his scenes were in black and white, and I don't know what it was, but I feel like that made some of his scenes even better. But overall, the entire cast of this movie did great. I could talk about each one individually, but that would make this video 3 hours long, just like the movie. So just a big shout out to the entire cast of Oppenheimer, because everyone did phenomenal and just elevated this movie. Next up for the good is the sound design / score of this movie, and as expected, these were both great. Now, I didn't see this movie in IMAX, so I probably didn't get the full experience of what this movie was supposed to sound like, but in my normal theater that I saw it in, the sound design was still great. It was probably at its best during the Trinity test scene, and on top of the great visuals that we got in that scene, I really think the sound is what made that scene so good. I love how they delayed the sound of the explosion to show the time it takes sound to travel, and then when you pair that great sound design up with the score of this movie, along with those visuals, oh my gosh, it just elevates this scene. And I feel like I'm saying this about a lot of scenes in this movie, but this was one of the best scenes in the movie. Now moving on to the next thing, and that is the cinematography. And visually, as expected, this movie looked beautiful. I just love the way this movie was shot slash edited. I mean, every shot we had in this movie really conveyed the emotion and intensity of the scene we were in. There were some scenes in this movie that I think could have gone completely without dialogue, and I think we still would have understood it by the way it was simply shot. And I probably will go see this movie again in IMAX so I can just get the full experience of how great this cinematography was and how great this movie was shot. And finally, for the good, I have the ending. Now, the ending of this movie, really just that whole entire third act, was a strong point in this movie. I was sitting on the edge of my seat as everything was slowly revealed and started to finally make sense in typical Christopher Nolan fashion. And I do have to mention that Emily Blunt in this third act really shined. I mean, she was great throughout the whole entire movie, but during this final part of the movie, during the Oppenheimer's trial, she really shined. And then we finally figure out what Oppenheimer said to Einstein there at the end of the movie, and it was just so chilling and a perfect way to end this movie. They mentioned it earlier in the movie when they were building the atom bomb that they didn't want to set off a chain reaction that would burn the atmosphere and essentially destroy the Earth. And although that didn't happen, they still did set off a chain reaction, just not in the way they thought. And ending the movie this way just really leaves you thinking about how much nuclear power the world has today because of Oppenheimer, and honestly, it's pretty scary to think about. Now moving on to the so-so, and the thing that I have here really doesn't have to do with the movie, it's more of that this movie may not be for everyone. Now, I'm a huge fan of Christopher Nolan, so I love his filmmaking, but for someone who isn't into more of a dialogue-heavy movie, you could find this movie pretty boring and it may not really be for you. And honestly, in my opinion, if you don't go into this movie with some pre-existing knowledge of the Manhattan Project, I could see this movie getting pretty confusing because this is one of those movies where you do have to pay attention in order to understand everything that's happening in the end. And that's one of the big reasons why I want to see this movie a second time, especially in IMAX, because there is a lot to digest with this movie. There is a lot that happened, and I am 100% sure that I probably missed quite a few things in this movie. And finally, moving on to the bad, and the only thing I have here is all right, let's move on. Overall, Oppenheimer is the best film of the year in my opinion, and honestly, I think this is one of Nolan's best films. Everything from the acting to the cinematography to the sound design to the editing was just phenomenal. It's a 3-hour movie that earns its runtime, and although it may not be for everyone, I still think everyone should still give this movie a shot. Those are my thoughts on Oppenheimer. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.